A painter paints, a sculptor sculpts, a designer designs, a builder builds, and a poet writes. Poems? Yes and no. There's more to being a poet than just writing poems, and there's more to creating poetry than just writing poems, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Let's get to it, Pruitt. Hello, friend faces. I'm Abby Dorable, and I'm here to clear the air when it comes to poems, poets, and poetry, because as much as I love poetry, it really needs a bit of renovation. If you love poetry too, if you're vaguely interested in what I'm talking about, or if you're just here for my hair and snazzy makeup, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. It keeps the wee beasties away and it keeps the YouTube engines happy. Thanks. Welcome, friend faces, to the fourth and final video of How to Poe, the beginning. We are finally here where we talk about Poe, what it is, what it isn't, and why it's necessary. But first, a tiny recap. Poetry, capital P, is an altered and more sensitive state of consciousness that resembles dreaming while awake, where we are more aware, more connected, and more open and receptive to the world around us. It's a state of mind that is triggered by something that makes us see the world differently, and it ultimately changes how we think. A poem is something that's really good at creating that altered state of mind. It's not the only thing that can evoke it, but it's kind of what my channel is about, so that's what I'm focusing on, the process of a poem using language to cause poetry and how we can hone that craft. Now, the reason a poem is so good at eliciting this poetic state of mind is because it is an object of language that is patterned and ordered for the purposes of expression, experimentation, communion, and or play to produce an effect to be experienced rather than to communicate information to be processed. So, it uses language differently in an attempt to convey what is inherently unsayable about experiences, connections, emotions, and being a human with awareness. A poet is someone who writes poems and strives to create poetry. Poet comes from the Greek word poetes. Sorry if I mispronounced that, I tried, but you know what I mean. I'll put it here on the screen. And that means maker, which is fitting. But I got to thinking, what of the actual making? How exactly does one create poetry via a poem? What does that require? And how do you hone all of it? Do you want the short answer or the long answer? The short answer is Poe. The long answer is Poe. Just kidding. Not really, though, because the answer is Poe. But what is Poe? That's a really good question, and it's not something we can turn to the dictionary for because it's something that I am positing. So it's up to me to define, and I am inviting you to join my process. First, let's talk about what Poe is not. Poe is not this guy.
What you say? Poe? That's me. Yes, Poe.
Well, he is a Poe, but not the Poe, because the Poe is a verb, or at least I'm suggesting we make it one. And here's why. We have the maker, the poet, who makes the thing, the poem, to cause a reaction, the poetry. But what of the making? More goes into a good poem than writing. And that, dear friend faces, is Poe. It is a process of making poetry with a capital P. Poe is the making, but also the intent behind the making. It's not enough to just write a poem and say one and done, but we have to craft it, to mold it, to make it into something that will evoke poetry. That is all Poe. See, Poe is a function. Zapruder would probably call it the workings of the machine, and rightly so. I mean, looking at it from that perspective, we have the craftsperson, the poet, the structure, the poem, and the end product, poetry, but the function is missing and requires more than just writing. The function is Poe. When you do any sort of making, writing, painting, sculpture, printmaking, drawing, etc., any type of making art, you go through a process of being inspired and then forming that inspiration into a thing using the media of whatever you're doing so that someone can engage in the finished product however deeply. Painting isn't just putting paint on a canvas. Drawing isn't just markings. Poeing isn't just writing words. All things are more than the total of their parts. Poe is the process of composing the final product. The end goal is to make some sort of thing that others can look at or read or listen to or whatever, depending on the medium, and experience the sum total of the parts of the process without seeing the individual pieces. And usually we want the sum to be more than just the power of its parts, and we want all the sums that we did to get to the end product to blend together so even the process isn't necessarily seen. I know that sounds like a lot, but here's what I mean. Take the Mona Lisa, for example. The Mona Lisa is just paint on a canvas. Literally, just some paint on a canvas. Now, you're probably arguing, but she's so much more, and you are right. That is precisely my point. While the literal object, the Mona Lisa, is just paint on a canvas, it's also one of the few arguably completed works that we, the world, have from Leonardo da Vinci, a master of his time. Her expression is a source of much study, inspiration, and analysis and curiosity. The composition is interesting and arresting, and it's referenced all throughout various media. Not to mention that one of the reasons it's only famous is because it was stolen and people actually went to the Louvre to look at the empty spot where she had been, but that fame followed her. And when she returned, she stayed famous and became this big cultural icon. And all of those qualities and history and everything go into the Mona Lisa. This painting is more than a painting. It is a symbol. It is an icon. It is something for people to engage in because it evokes poetry powerfully. So powerfully, the Mona Lisa, again, just paint on a canvas, is part of a very nearly global culture. So much so, you can say Mona and people will say Lisa.
Hey, Rumi. When I say Mona, what do you think of?
Lisa.
What was that? Say it louder.
Lisa?
Thank you.
It doesn't matter that it was created as part of the Italian Renaissance. It has become part of our collective narrative, basically worldwide, because it is more than the sums of its parts, and it is that sum that has woven itself into the very fabric of our culture. That connection, that lasting impact is what everyone who creates and shares what they create hopes for of their creations. And then for their names to be synonymous with creating consistent work which evokes that poetry. In short, they want to be known for poeing. So, in essence, to engage in this process is to poe, especially when the creations are in the medium of language. Now, I'm opening it up to all sorts of mediums because the act of Poe itself needs to be separate from just creating poems, as poetry is separate from poems. But the question that we come up with is, regardless of the media, how do we Poe? Well, that's what this whole channel is about and what we are going to explore. But for now, we can talk about what the process looks like. This is a fancy Venn diagram that I have called the anatomy of Poe. Again, not this guy, because YouTube would probably take issue with that sort of picture. Basically, this outlines the creative process, but I'm using it specifically in reference to creating poems because that's what my channel is all about. Here you have expression, experimentation, and convention. Where these things individually overlap and where they all three overlap is the goal of creating a work of art. This is where the pieces individually come together to form something that is successful at being more than the components of its medium. A poem becomes more than a poem, or insert whatever medium you prefer, when it impacts the reader or readers and changes the way they see and think about what we call reality. In short, when it evokes a poetic state of mind. Here are some examples. Il Pleut falls in this area where expression and experimentation overlap. The poem itself is a decent enough poem, but what makes it so arresting is the blend of a good poem in the form of rain falling. It shirks all sorts of conventions of form, and that is part of what makes it so successful. Silencio, on the other hand, falls here, where experimentation and convention overlap. As a poem, this is just one word repeated, but it's the absence and the positioning of the absence, i.e. experimentation with convention, that makes it something we can engage in successfully. A lot of really solid poetry falls here, where expression and convention overlap, whether the poem has a prescribed form or not. Most published poetry falls here. It's good and it's something to engage in because it blends expression and convention beautifully. Now here in the center is where all three of them overlap and where everyone strives to have their poems or work land. This belongs to the truly great works that linger in the collective consciousness of culture for generations. Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass is a good example, or Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, or for something more modern, Joy Harjo's She Had Some Horses. Now, out here, where we have no overlap, is where we all begin as creators. We learn about how we can express in our medium, how we can experiment in our medium, and how we can use the tools of our medium. So, how do we get from these areas to these areas and hopefully at some point this area? First, we have to do whatever medium in which we are doing. We want to grow our knowledge and skills, so we have to practice in that medium. Practice can be, for example, for poetry, lowercase p, writing poems, editing poems, playing with words, reading poems, and learning about the craft with workshops, classes, reading books, and watching this YouTube channel. Thank you for allowing my shameless plug. But basically, there needs to be a level of immersion in the craft where the focus is doing. Learning about your medium is part of it, but it is a smaller part. You need to be involved in your community, yes, but you need to put what you learn to practice by doing and doing and doing. Whatever you experience in your life becomes fodder for your creativity. Everything gives your subconscious proverbial food to digest. But without some sort of directive, there is very little that can grow and be sustained. Effectively, we need some sort of scaffolding to support whatever germinates from our subconscious. Participating in your preferred medium, learning about the craft, and engaging in discourse about the craft all work by giving your subconscious this directive. This is the DNA of creativity, so to speak. Now, we are hardwired with the creative drive, and anyone can create something with whatever medium they like. But for it to be effective at resonating with others, we need to learn to Poe. What you see others do, how they do it, general guidelines on what or how, and the random stuff you pick up all throughout the learning process, all of this impacts your subconscious. In essence, it's the seed that gets planted and your subconscious sprouts inspiration with the proper nourishment. But true growth happens when you can take your inspiration sprout and pull more from it, i.e., move the proverbial food from your subconscious to your conscious mind, where you can grow it into something new and shape it into something extraordinary. That is all the process of Poe. It is in the doing and the making better. It is in the writing and in the revising. It is in the reading and the talking about, all to make the process of moving the internal experience in subconscious to practice in conscious via inspiration to communicate experiences with the outside world. It gives us a framework and guidance so that we can do more than throw a dart and hope to hit the center of our Venn diagram. It gives us the training that we need to turn practice and play into art and craft. Aside from immersion, there are a few other qualities that one needs to have and or develop to Poe and Poe well. This list is by no means exhaustive, but it is a good starting point. 1. Love of the medium, in this case language. Words are funny things that do so much work and often fail at funny times, but we can use where they fail and where they succeed and where they are ambiguous to make them mean more than the sums of their parts. And to do so effectively, you have to have a love of those nuances of language. 2. Curiosity. It is easy to look around the world and judge everything as good or bad or lacking or whatever. It is more difficult to look around, even when things get bad, with a sense of wonder and appreciation for the fact that you're alive and how weird that experience and how incredible that fact is. Being able to look at things with curiosity lets you look at them differently in the first place so that you can share that different view with others to evoke poetry. 3. Appreciation of the absurd. This kind of goes hand in hand with curiosity. The curiosity lets you see the absurd, but appreciating the absurd lets you delve into it and find those hidden gems of thought and experience that are worth transforming through the process of Poe. 4. The drive to play. I've mentioned that to write poems and create poetry, you need to play with language. And it's absolutely true. But more than that, you need to be able to look at the rules you spent many years learning and honing, and you have to have a desire to shirk them with a purpose. That requires the play instinct. 5. Tendencies towards hoarding bits of your chosen medium. In this case, it's words and turns of phrase. Cliches are easy pitfalls to fall into, but it's easy enough to get out of when you collect words as a hobby. This goes beyond love. This delves a bit into obsession, which is absolutely healthy in moderation, I promise. 6. The courage to create complete and utter crap. Most poems written are garbage. Most poems exist on paper and never get published. Most poems are worthy of at least one cringe and likely more. And you have to be brave enough to embrace that as part of the process. All of us start in the outer circles, and that's where our crap is made, and we have to do and do more, and we hone and we get closer to the center every time. That is the process of Poe. 7. The strength to face the darkest and most secret bits of yourself, to face everything terrifying, painful, lonely, overwhelming, and not only not run from it, but to harness it to create. Now, everyone has trauma. Life is traumatic, and there is no handbook. And if there was one, I'm pretty sure it would look like the shit that we get from IKEA. Okay? So that trauma and the joy and the laughter and every experience forms the food for your creativity. Facing the joy and laughter, that's the easy part to metabolize so that you can, make it into your own history and use it. But the difficult stuff, the stuff that you don't want to face, you have to, in order to metabolize it and make it a part of your history, to own it and to use it. Otherwise, it will just sit there and rot. And I am speaking from personal experience. 8. The fortitude to withstand the necessary silence and love it enough to listen to it. Silence is a vital part of poetry because it is our negative space, but it is never empty for for poets. Silence is the soil where the richest inspiration grows, and it is also the backdrop of our finished works. So, embracing that silence and loving that silence is vital. 9. The capacity to let go of your idea and let the work lead itself once you start giving life to it. If you have something you want to say, you're not poeing. Poe isn't about what you want to express, it's about what comes out of the process of expression. That's a subtle difference, but any text that you read about the craft of poetry states very plainly that if you are writing what you want to say, you are not writing poetry, lowercase p. Thus, you are not evoking poetry, uppercase p. Now, we'll explore this topic a lot in future videos because there's a very subtle difference between what you want to express and what comes out of the process of your expression. But for now, this is just really important to note. 10. The tenacity to take critique and rejection and use it. Now, critique and rejection are not the same thing. I've got a whole video, maybe even a series, planned on the process of critique, both self-critique and critiquing with peers. Critique is a vital part of the process, as is rejection. And for most, these are a painful part of the process. So it's important to have the guts to take critique and rejection and use them to inform later decisions and work. We will be discussing more about this, but again, this is just important to note for now. 11. The ability to say what if and then reply yes and then continue on to but then. People who have ideas all say what if. Everyone has ideas. Everyone says what if. But you can't stop at the what if. You have to follow it down the weird rabbit hole and come out the other side, which brings me to my final point on this list. 12. The trust in yourself and the process. Enough trust to let go of control and relinquish it and yourself, and know that while the process may hurt and it may bring up stuff you'd rather avoid, and you will change, you will survive the process. And it is part of the process to be changed by it. You need to learn to trust that and your capacity for strength to endure it. This is not by any means an exhaustive list, but it does hold some of the most important ones that I have come across, and the ones here are fairly universal regardless of your medium. Because Poe, like poetry, isn't exclusive to poems. Now, we will be delving into these qualities more in future videos, but suffice it to say, these qualities are a vital part of Poe because they represent what it takes to practice. And as intense as all of this sounds, it's mostly fairly intuitive. Poe is a process of creating something, in this case a poem, to evoke poetry. We all know how to create, but Poe is the process of honing as well as creating, and it's of creating in such a way that it creates poetry in a wide variety of people and not just yourself. Poe leaves room for people to do bad art and grow from it while encouraging them to do less bad art the next time around, unless they want to stay on the outskirts, because to some, the process of creation, not honing, is the important part of the process, which is entirely valid. But that's not necessarily what we're covering on this channel. So where does that leave us today? Well, that leaves us with a lot of food for thought, but also it finishes our beginning. We have gone deep into the world of Poe. Once again, not this guy.
Poe, that's me. Yeah, it's Poe.
And now it's time to do something with it. First, feel free to let me know what you think about the verbing of Poe and what you think about the creative process in general. I will read and reply where I can. Second, get whichever device you like to write with, pen and paper, laptop, phone, tablet, dictaphone, whatever, and for 10 minutes, Write without stopping the prompt, I remember. 10 minutes of memories. If you lose your train of thought, just keep writing and start a new sentence of I remember. Go longer if you want, but sincerely, give yourself the full 10 minutes because we need to scratch away at the surface of your subconscious to get to the darker soil beneath. And this is a very effective way to do that. Do the 10 minutes, save it, and we will come back to it later. I'm going to do it right along with you. And please don't put it in the comments section. You can put your reaction to the process in the comments section. In fact, please do, but don't put the full 10 minutes of private memories there or any of your poetry. And I'll explain why. It's not that I don't want to read your poetry or poems. I'll explain in future videos because this one's already way too long, but just trust me for now, don't put your poems in the comments, okay? A special thank you today to my fam, Nico, John, and Co. They've been amazing to have in my life. Of course, thank you to my family, and thank you to all of you, dear friend faces. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that I can bring you more poems, poets, and all things poetry. And if you want to support poetic content in a more direct way, hop on over to my Patreon, where you can become an official friend face for just $1 a month. It goes to buying props and keeping the fairy lights on. But for now, that's all we have for today. Thanks for watching, friend faces. Peace out, and remember, be kind to one another. Love and Poe.